The champagne fountain sparkled like liquid gold under the crystal chandeliers, and everywhere I looked, people were laughing, clinking glasses, celebrating love. Except when they looked at me. Then the smiles flickered, just for a second, before they turned away. I should have been used to it by now. 20 years in this family had taught me that being adopted meant you were always a guest, never quite family. But standing there in my pale blue bridesmaid dress, watching my sister Vanessa glide through the crowd in her $10,000 gown, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just another family gathering where I faded into the background. This was different. This hurt more. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Grandview Estate stretched across 15 acres of manicured gardens and vineyard hills just outside Portland. White roses climbed every column, and a string quartet played softly near the ceremony arch. It was the kind of wedding you see in magazines, the kind where everything is perfect except for the people in it. I'd arrived early that morning to help Vanessa get ready, just like she'd asked. Or rather, just like Mom had asked on her behalf. Vanessa hadn't actually spoken to me in 3 weeks, not since I'd declined to pay for her bachelorette trip to the Maldives. Apparently, expecting me to drop $8,000 on a week of yacht parties was reasonable in her mind. When I'd explained that I was saving for something important, she'd sent back a single text. Typical. Always about you. The ceremony had been beautiful, I had to admit that much. Derek Hamilton stood at the altar looking every bit the successful businessman he was, tall and composed in his charcoal gray suit. I'd never met him before today. Vanessa had kept her relationship surprisingly private, which wasn't like her at all. Usually, she broadcast every detail of her life across social media like it was breaking news. But Derek had been different. She'd mentioned him in passing, posted a few carefully filtered photos, but mostly kept the details vague. When I'd asked Mom about him, she just said he was in commercial real estate and came from a good family. That was code for wealthy. I watched them exchange vows, watched Vanessa's perfectly practiced tears, watched Derek slip the ring onto her finger with a tenderness that seemed genuine. For a moment, just a brief moment, I felt something like hope. Maybe he would be good to her. Maybe he would soften some of her sharp edges, teach her that value wasn't measured in bank accounts and brand names. Maybe he'd even help her see that family meant more than bloodlines. That hope died about 30 minutes later during the cocktail hour. I'd been standing near the hors d'oeuvres table, trying to look occupied while everyone else clustered in their little groups of college friends and country club acquaintances. Dad walked past me twice without acknowledgement, too busy greeting business associates. Brandon, my brother, gave me an apologetic shrug from across the patio but didn't come over. He'd learned long ago that defending me only made things awkward for everyone. Mom was fussing over Vanessa's dress, making sure every detail was captured by the photographer she'd hired for an obscene amount of money. That's when Diane Foster, the wedding planner, approached me with a clipboard and an uncomfortable expression. She was a petite woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that had probably seen every kind of family drama imaginable. She cleared her throat softly before speaking, her voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear. "Miss Preston, there's been a slight adjustment to the seating arrangements for dinner." I nodded, waiting. I'd been placed at table 12 during the rehearsal dinner, tucked in the back corner with some of Vanessa's old co-workers she barely spoke to anymore. Not ideal, but not surprising either. "You've been moved to table 18. Diane glanced down at her clipboard like the words written there might somehow be less offensive if she wasn't looking at me. "It's in the overflow section, just past the main ballroom." There was something in her tone, something careful and deliberate, that made my stomach drop. "The overflow section?" I repeated. "That's where they put vendors and plus ones who didn't RSVP in time." Diane's mouth pressed into a thin line. She didn't deny it. "I'm just following the bride's instructions." Before I could respond, Vanessa's voice cut across the patio like a knife. She was talking to one of her bridesmaids, but her voice carried in that particular way that meant she wanted certain people to hear. "I specifically told them that adopted family sits in the back section." This day is about blood, about real family legacy. I don't want the aesthetic ruined in the photos. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around me, conversations stuttered and stopped. I saw heads turn, saw the uncomfortable shifting of weight, saw pity flash across faces before people looked away. The hors d'oeuvre in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I set it down carefully on the nearest table, concentrating on that simple motion because if I didn't focus on something small and manageable, I was going to break down right there in front of 200 people. Blood family. Real family. 20 years of trying to belong, 20 years of perfect grades and never causing trouble, 20 years of showing up to every holiday and birthday and family dinner, and I was still just the adopted kid who ruined the aesthetic. I turned to walk away, head high, shoulders back, the way Grandma Helen had taught me. Don't let them see you break, Natalie, she used to say. You hold your head up and you walk like you own the ground beneath your feet, because you do. You belong everywhere you choose to stand. But Grandma had been gone for 10 years now, and I'd never felt less like I belonged anywhere. I made it halfway across the patio when I heard the voice. Natalie? Natalie Preston? The voice was male, confused, and coming from behind me. I turned slowly, blinking back the heat behind my eyes. Derek Hamilton was standing 3 feet away, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to something that looked almost like shock. His best man, Marcus Chin, stood beside him, equally confused. Derek took a step forward, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. He glanced back toward where Vanessa was still holding court with her bridesmaids, then back at me. His voice dropped lower, almost reverent. You're N. Preston. You're my boss. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Around us, the string quartet continued playing, champagne continued flowing, but everything else had gone completely silent in my ears. Behind Derek, I saw several guests lean in closer, trying to hear. I saw Vanessa's head whip around, her expression frozen somewhere between confusion and anger. I saw Dad's face drain of color. And I saw Mom's hand fly to her mouth. I'm sorry, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. What? Derek's face broke into an incredulous smile, the kind of smile you give when the universe hands you something completely unexpected and somehow perfect. Cloud Nest Solutions. You're the CEO. We've been working together for 3 years. I've never seen your face because you always kept your camera off during our video meetings, but your voice, I'd recognize it anywhere. N. Preston. He gestured at me like the evidence was obvious. Natalie Preston. My mind was racing, trying to catch up with what was happening. Derek Hamilton. Hamilton Enterprises. My largest client, the commercial real estate developer whose company had single-handedly kept Cloud Nest Solutions profitable during our 2nd year when we'd almost gone under. The man who'd sent a handwritten thank you note after we'd prevented a major security breach in his system. The client who always addressed emails to Miss Preston with unfailing respect and professionalism. He was marrying my sister. Before I could form a coherent response, Vanessa was there, her hand possessively on Derek's arm, her smile tight and dangerous. Darling, what are you talking about? This is just Natalie, my adopted sister. She works in IT or something. Nothing important. Derek turned to look at his new wife, and I watched something change in his expression. It wasn't anger exactly, more like a door closing somewhere deep behind his eyes. His voice remained polite, but it had lost its warmth. IT or something? Vanessa, Natalie owns Cloud Nest Solutions. She's the reason Hamilton Enterprises hasn't had a single security breach in 3 years. She's saved us millions in potential losses. He looked back at me, and now there was something else in his expression. Concern, maybe. Or recognition of a deeper problem. Her company is valued at over $50 million. The patio had gone completely silent now. Even the string quartet seemed to sense something important was happening and had let their music fade. Vanessa's face cycled through several expressions, shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally settling on fury barely masked by her pageant smile. That's impossible, she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Natalie barely graduated college. She's never had a real job. She lives in some tiny apartment in Seattle and drives a car that's 10 years old. I drive a 10-year-old car because I invested every dollar I had into building something real, I heard myself say. The words came out steady and calm, carrying across the patio with surprising clarity. And yes, my apartment is small. I don't need much space. I've been too busy running a company that employs 43 people and serves clients in 17 states. Marcus Chin stepped forward, pulling out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to show Vanessa. That's her. Cloud Nest Solutions, founded 8 years ago. There's an article in Tech Business magazine from last year. He scrolled down. Forbes listed her as one of the top 30 entrepreneurs under 30 in the Pacific Northwest. I'd forgotten about that Forbes article. I declined the photo shoot, just let them use my company headshot, the one where I wore glasses and my hair pulled back, looking nothing like I did now in a bridesmaid dress with my hair in elaborate curls. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dad appeared then, his face red, his voice booming in that way he used when he was trying to regain control of a situation. This is ridiculous. Natalie, stop trying to ruin your sister's wedding with these fantasies. We all know you've struggled since college. There's no shame in it, but making up stories? Derek turned to face my father, and his expression had gone completely cold. Mr. Preston, with all due respect, I've been paying Cloud Nest Solutions over $200,000 annually for the past 3 years. I've spoken with Miss Preston, your daughter, at least twice a month during that entire time. I've signed contracts with her company. I've had my legal team verify every detail of her credentials. He paused, letting that sink in. She's not making up stories. But someone here clearly has been. The reception dinner was scheduled to start in 20 minutes, but the carefully planned timeline had already derailed. Vanessa had disappeared into the bridal suite with Mom, their raised voices audible even from the patio. Dad stood near the bar, nursing a scotch and avoiding eye contact with everyone. Brandon had finally approached me, his expression apologetic and confused in equal measure. I had no idea, he said quietly. About your company, I mean. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at my brother, this person I'd grown up alongside but never quite connected with, and tried to find words that wouldn't sound bitter. When would I have told you, Brandon? At Christmas when everyone was too busy talking about Vanessa's promotion? At Dad's birthday when he gave me a bookstore gift card while giving you the keys to his vintage Mercedes? At Easter when Mom introduced me to her friends as our foster daughter even though the adoption was finalized 20 years ago? Brandon flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? I kept my voice level, refusing to let the emotion crack through. I stopped trying to be part of this family's conversations years ago. Nobody listened anyway. Derek appeared beside us, Marcus a step behind him. He'd removed his jacket and loosened his tie, and he looked like a man who just had several assumptions about his life violently rearranged. Miss Preston, he began, then paused. Can I call you Natalie here? I've always been Natalie, I said. And Preston was just easier for business. People take you more seriously when they can't immediately tell your age or gender from your name. Smart, Marcus interjected. He extended his hand. Marcus Chen, Derek's business partner. I've sat in on probably 20 of your strategy calls. Your security architecture is brilliant. I shook his hand, still feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else. Thank you. Derek rubbed his face, a gesture of exhaustion and stress. I need to understand something, and please, I'm asking because I genuinely don't understand. How did your family not know about Cloud Nest? How did Vanessa not know she was marrying someone whose business depends on your company? That's an excellent question, I said. The answer is complicated, but it basically comes down to the fact that nobody in my family has ever been particularly interested in what I do with my life. I've mentioned my company before. Dad called it my little computer hobby. Mom suggested I should focus on finding a husband instead. And Vanessa, I paused, choosing my words carefully. Vanessa has always been very clear that she's the successful one in the family. She told me her sister worked as a junior IT tech at some small firm, Derek said slowly. She said you struggled financially and that she often had to help you out. I've never taken $1 from Vanessa in my life, I said flatly. In fact, the only money that's ever moved between us went the other direction. I paid for her car repairs last year when she called me crying about not being able to afford them. She told me not to tell anyone because it would be embarrassing for her. Derek's jaw tightened. The pieces were clearly falling into place, and the picture they were forming wasn't pretty. Marcus looked like he wanted to say something but was wisely staying quiet. The wedding planner, Diane, appeared again, her professional mask firmly in place despite the chaos. Mr. Hamilton, we need to make a decision about dinner. The caterers are asking whether to proceed with the original timeline or delay. Derek looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Before we do anything else, I need to fix something. He turned to Diane. Table 18 needs to be removed from the floor plan entirely. Miss Preston will be seated at the head table. Diane's eyebrows rose slightly. Sir, the head table is reserved for immediate family and the wedding party. Exactly, Derek said. And Miss Preston is in the wedding party. She's also the reason I have a business at all. If she hadn't caught that vulnerability in our system 2 years ago, we'd have lost everything to that ransomware attack. He looked back at me. I've been trying to meet you in person for 3 years. I never imagined it would be at my own wedding, but I'm not starting my marriage by allowing someone who's done more for my success than almost anyone to be shuffled into an overflow section like she doesn't matter. I felt something crack in my chest, some wall I'd been carefully maintaining. This man, this stranger who just married my sister, was showing me more respect in 5 minutes than my family had shown me in 20 years. That's not necessary, I started to say, but Derek held up his hand. Yes, it is. And frankly, I need to have a conversation with my wife about why she felt the need to lie about you. Marcus, can you handle the business side of things while I deal with the personal disaster I've apparently walked into? Marcus nodded. I've got it. He glanced at me. Miss Preston, Natalie, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. This is not how today should have gone. After Marcus left, Derek gestured toward a quiet corner of the patio, away from the remaining guests. Brandon hesitated, then quietly excused himself, leaving Derek and me alone. The sun was starting to set, painting the vineyard hills in shades of amber and rose. It should have been beautiful. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like standing in the wreckage of something that had been broken for a very long time. I need to ask you something, Derek said. And I need you to be honest with me. I've never been anything but honest with you, I replied. Even when you couldn't see my face on those video calls. He smiled faintly at that. Fair point. He took a breath. Did you know I was marrying Vanessa when you took Hamilton Enterprises as a client? No, I said immediately. I had no idea. Vanessa barely told the family anything about you until the engagement announcement, and even then, she just said your name and that you were in real estate. I don't follow her social media closely. We're not, I paused, searching for the right word. We're not close. But you knew her last name would become Hamilton. I stopped attending family functions regularly about 5 years ago, I admitted. I show up for major holidays and events like this, but I don't keep detailed track of her life. When she sent the wedding invitation, it was the first time I'd heard your full name. Even then, I didn't make the connection. Hamilton is a common name, and I never imagined my sister would be marrying someone in Portland's business community. She always talked about moving to New York or Los Angeles. Derek nodded slowly, processing this. So this whole time, we've been working together, I've been sending money to your company, relying on your expertise, and you had no idea you were helping your future brother-in-law. Not until you said my name about 20 minutes ago. He laughed, but it was a hollow sound without humor. This is insane. This whole situation is completely insane. He ran his hand through his hair, messing up the careful styling. I've been married for less than 2 hours, and I'm already questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife. I don't know what to tell you, I said quietly. I can't defend Vanessa's choices or explain why she said what she said. I can only tell you that this is how it's always been. I'm the adopted daughter, the one who doesn't quite fit, the one who's kept at arm's length. Today was just more explicit than usual. The adopted daughter who built a $50 million company, Derek said. The adopted daughter who saved my business. The adopted daughter who apparently has more integrity and success than anyone in her family wants to acknowledge. Something in his voice made me look up sharply. There was anger there, but it wasn't directed at me. It was the kind of anger that comes from having your eyes open to an uncomfortable truth. Before I could respond, the door to the bridal suite burst open. Vanessa emerged, her makeup refreshed, her dress rearranged, her expression set in that particular smile she used when she was determined to get her way. Mom followed behind her, looking anxious. They approached us with the kind of forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Derek, darling, Vanessa said, her voice sugary sweet. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Natalie has always had such an imagination, and sometimes she exaggerates things to make herself seem more important than she is. You know how family dynamics can be. Derek's expression didn't change. He just looked at his wife with the kind of careful neutrality that came from years of business negotiations. So you're saying Natalie is lying about owning Cloud Nest Solutions? Vanessa's smile flickered. Well, I wouldn't say lying exactly. Maybe she has some small involvement with a company by that name, but $50 million? That's absurd. Our family would know if she had that kind of success. Would you? Derek pulled out his phone and turned it toward Vanessa. Because I'm looking at the state business registry right now. Cloud Nest Solutions, LLC, registered 8 years ago. Primary owner and CEO, Natalie Marie Preston. Current valuation based on last year's independent audit, $52 million. He scrolled down. Here's her TechCrunch interview from 6 months ago. Here's the Forbes profile Marcus mentioned. Here's a photograph from a security conference where she was a keynote speaker. Vanessa stared at the phone like it might bite her. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's documented fact, Derek said. His voice remained calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. What I'm trying to understand is why you told me your sister was barely scraping by when she's actually more financially successful than either of us. Mom stepped forward, her voice taking on that pleading tone she used when she wanted to smooth things over. Derek, sweetheart, you have to understand. We've always worried about Natalie. She's so private, so secretive. We thought she was struggling and too proud to ask for help. If we'd known about this company, of course we would have celebrated it. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You did know, I said. All 3 of them turned to look at me. I told you about Cloud Nest 6 years ago when I hired my 10th employee. I invited you to the office opening. None of you came. Dad said he was too busy with work. Mom had a charity luncheon. Vanessa said she didn't do tech stuff. That was different, Mom protested. You made it sound like a little startup, not a real company. It was a real company from day one, I said. You just didn't consider it real because I was the one doing it. The same way you didn't consider my college degree real because it was in computer science instead of business. The same way you didn't consider my apartment real because it wasn't in the right neighborhood. Nothing I do is ever quite real enough for this family. Vanessa's mask was starting to crack. Her voice rose slightly. You always do this, Natalie. You always make everything about you. This is my wedding day, and you're trying to steal attention. I'm not trying to steal anything, I said wearily. You're the one who announced to 200 people that adopted family sits in the back. You made this about me. I was perfectly content to sit at table 12 and be forgotten. Derek turned to Vanessa, and his voice had gone very quiet. You actually said that? About adopted families sitting in the back? Vanessa's eyes darted between Derek and me, calculating. I was joking. It was just a joke between me and my bridesmaids. Diane Foster appeared again, and this time she looked directly at me with something like respect. Miss Preston, I was standing 10 feet away when Mrs. Hamilton made that comment. It was not phrased as a joke. It was given as an explicit instruction about seating arrangements. Vanessa rounded on the wedding planner. You're fired. Actually, Derek said quietly, you can't fire her. I hired her, and she's done an excellent job managing an increasingly difficult situation. He looked at Vanessa. We need to talk. Privately. They disappeared back into the bridal suite, leaving me standing on the patio with Mom. The sun had fully set now, and the fairy lights strung through the garden had begun to glow. In the distance, I could hear guests laughing and talking, unaware of the drama unfolding backstage. Natalie, Mom began, her voice tentative. I know today has been difficult. I held up my hand, stopping her. I don't want to do this right now, Mom. I don't have the energy to make you feel better about treating me like I don't belong. That's not fair. Isn't it? When's the last time you introduced me as your daughter without qualifying it? When's the last time you asked about my life beyond surface pleasantries? When's the last time you defended me when Vanessa or Dad said something dismissive? Mom's eyes filled with tears. I love you, Natalie. I know you do, I said, and I meant it. But love isn't enough when it comes with conditions and qualifications. Love doesn't ask someone to sit in the back section so they don't ruin the aesthetic. I walked away before she could respond, making my way toward the parking lot. I'd fulfilled my bridesmaid duties. I'd walked down the aisle, I'd stood during the ceremony, I'd smiled for photos. I was done. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me. Brandon called out my name, slightly out of breath. Wait. Please. I stopped but didn't turn around. What, Brandon? He came around to face me. I wanted to apologize. For not knowing. For not asking. For not standing up for you when I should have. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He seemed genuinely distressed, his tie loosened, his hair messed up from running his hands through it. You're not responsible for Vanessa's behavior, I said. No, but I'm responsible for mine, he said. And I've been just as bad. Maybe not as obvious about it, but just as bad. I let Dad dismiss you. I let Vanessa treat you like you were less than. I made jokes about you being adopted like it was funny instead of hurtful. He took a shaky breath. I'm sorry, Natalie. I'm genuinely sorry. The apology caught me off guard. Of everyone in my family, Brandon had always been the most neutral, the most carefully uninvolved. Hearing him take responsibility for his own actions, not just apologizing on behalf of others, meant something. Thank you, I said simply. Are you leaving? I think it's best. Derek wants you to stay. He was pretty insistent about it. Brandon managed a weak smile. I think he's more on your side than Vanessa's right now. That's going to make for an interesting marriage. Brandon winced. Yeah. He paused. Can I ask you something? About your company, about everything you've built. Why did you keep it so quiet? I didn't keep it quiet, I corrected. I told people. I invited people. I tried to share my success. But when nobody shows interest, when every achievement is met with skepticism or dismissal, you eventually stop trying to include people who clearly don't want to be included. We really screwed this up, didn't we? Yes, I said honestly. You really did. But the good news is that my success has never depended on this family's approval. I built Cloud Nest in spite of you, not because of you. And that feels pretty good. Brandon nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I know that doesn't mean much coming from someone who should have said it years ago, but I mean it. It means more than you think, I admitted. We stood there in the parking lot as the sounds of the reception drifted across the evening air. My car was right there, waiting. I could leave, go back to Seattle, go back to my quiet apartment and my company and my life that made sense. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the fact that Derek had stood up for me when my own family hadn't. Maybe it was the tiny crack in Brandon's armor, the first genuine apology I'd received from anyone in this family in years. Or maybe it was just exhaustion, the bone-deep tiredness that comes from running away from people who are supposed to love you. "I'll stay for dinner," I heard myself say. "But I'm leaving right after. And I'm not sitting at table 18. Brandon smiled. "I don't think Derek would allow it even if you wanted to." We walked back toward the estate together, and for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like I was walking alone. The grand ballroom had been transformed while the drama unfolded outside. Round tables dressed in cream and gold surrounded a parquet dance floor that reflected the light from 3 massive chandeliers. The head table sat elevated on a small platform, draped in silk with arrangements of white orchids and trailing greenery. My place card, which had originally been destined for table 18 in some forgotten corner, now rested between Brandon's seat and Marcus Chen's. Derek had personally overseen the rearrangement, much to Diane Foster's barely concealed approval. I took my seat as guests began filtering in from the cocktail hour, their conversations animated by the open bar and the spectacular sunset views. Most were unaware of what had transpired on the patio. They saw only a beautiful wedding at an exclusive venue, a stunning bride, a handsome groom, and all the trappings of a perfect society event. But the people at the head table knew better. We sat in a bubble of tension that no amount of floral arrangements could disguise. Vanessa appeared from the bridal suite with her smile reconstructed, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd reapplied her lipstick, fixed a few stray curls, and somehow managed to look like nothing had disturbed her perfect day. It was a talent she'd always possessed, this ability to compartmentalize and present whatever face the situation required. As a child, I'd admired it. As an adult, I recognized it for what it was, a survival mechanism born from years of learning that image mattered more than truth in the Preston household. Derek followed behind her, his expression unreadable. Whatever conversation they'd had in that private room had left visible marks. His jaw was set in a way that suggested clenched teeth, and his hand, when it briefly touched the small of Vanessa's back as they approached the head table, seemed more automatic than affectionate. They took their seats at the center, Vanessa immediately engaging with her maid of honor in bright, slightly too loud conversation. Derek remained quiet, his gaze occasionally drifting toward where I sat 3 seats down. The first course arrived with practiced efficiency. Servers in crisp white jackets placed plates of seared scallops with microgreens and citrus foam before each guest. Conversation swelled around us, the normal wedding chatter about how beautiful everything looked, how moving the ceremony had been, how perfect the couple seemed together. At our table, we ate in relative silence broken only by polite requests to pass the bread basket or refill wine glasses. Catherine Preston, my mother, had been seated at a table with Richard, my father, and several of their closest friends from the country club. I could see her dabbing at her eyes periodically with her napkin, the picture of maternal emotion. Whether she was crying from genuine distress or performing for her audience, I couldn't tell. Probably both. Mom had always been skilled at believing her own narratives, at convincing herself that whatever emotions she displayed in the moment were absolutely authentic, regardless of what contradicted them. Dad sat rigid in his seat, his face still carrying that ruddy color that suggested either anger or embarrassment, possibly both. He'd built his identity on being the successful businessman, the patriarch who commanded respect, the man whose family reflected well on his status. Having his adopted daughter revealed as more financially successful than he'd ever been, in front of his business associates and social circle, had clearly punctured something fundamental in his self-image. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Brandon made an effort at conversation, asking about Seattle, about the tech industry, about anything that might normalize the surreal situation we found ourselves in. I appreciated the attempt even as I recognized it for what it was. My brother trying to retrofit a relationship that should have been built over decades but instead had to be assembled hastily from spare parts and good intentions. Marcus proved to be unexpectedly easy to talk to. He asked thoughtful questions about cloud security architecture, about the challenges of scaling a company, about my approach to client relationships. It was the kind of professional discussion I had regularly in my actual life, and the familiarity of it provided a strange anchor in the midst of the wedding's emotional chaos. "I have to admit," Marcus said quietly, leaning slightly toward me so his voice wouldn't carry, "I always wondered why you never agreed to in-person meetings." Derek tried for years to set up a lunch or dinner, just to put a face to the voice. "You always had reasons why remote communication worked better." I set down my fork carefully. The truth was complicated and personal, and I wasn't sure I wanted to share it with someone I'd technically just met, even if we had been working together remotely for 3 years. But something about the day, about having already been so thoroughly exposed and vulnerable, made the usual walls seem pointless. "I built Cloud Nest to be taken seriously," I said. "Young women in tech face certain assumptions. We're too emotional, too soft, not technical enough, only good at the social or administrative aspects of the business." I knew that if I showed up in person, if clients saw a 22-year-old woman when they expected an established CEO, they'd discount everything I said. My expertise would be questioned. My pricing would be challenged. My authority would be constantly undermined. Marcus nodded slowly. "So you let them imagine whoever they wanted to imagine." "Exactly. On video calls with my camera off, I was just a voice and a track record. My solutions worked. My security held. My company delivered results. That's what mattered. Once I had enough successful years behind me, once Cloud Nest had a reputation that preceded me, then I could consider being more visible." I glanced toward where Vanessa sat, her hand possessively on Derek's arm as she laughed at something her maid of honor had said. Though I'll admit, there was also a part of me that didn't want my family finding out. Didn't want to deal with their reactions. Which would have been what? I considered the question. Disbelief, probably. Or attempts to claim credit somehow, to insert themselves into the narrative. My father would have wanted to be named as an advisor or investor, even though he never gave me $1. My mother would have wanted to throw parties and take social credit for my success. And Vanessa, I paused, watching my sister hold court at the center of the head table. Vanessa would have found a way to make it about her, to diminish it, or to compete with it. Instead, you just built your company quietly and let them think whatever they wanted to think. It seemed simpler that way. The main course arrived, herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables and a red wine reduction. The servers worked with choreographed precision, placing plates and refreshing drinks while remaining invisible. I cut into the lamb, which was cooked perfectly, and tried to remember the last time I'd attended an event this elaborate. Probably never, actually. The Preston family had money, but they weren't quite in the realm of 15-acre estate weddings with string quartets and 7-course meals. Derek had apparently funded most of the wedding himself, according to something Brandon had mentioned earlier. Vanessa had wanted a spectacle, and Derek had the means to provide it. I wondered now what he was thinking, sitting beside his new wife, watching her perform perfection while the foundation of their relationship showed cracks barely 2 hours into the marriage. As if sensing my thoughts, Derek rose from his seat and tapped his knife against his wine glass. The conversations throughout the ballroom gradually quieted as guests turned their attention to the head table. The best man's speech was scheduled for after dinner, but Derek had apparently decided to deviate from the program. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. He had the kind of natural authority that came from years of leading business meetings and closing deals. "Vanessa and I are grateful for your presence as we begin this new chapter of our lives together." Standard wedding speech opening. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Vanessa smiled up at him, her expression perfectly calibrated for the moment. "Weddings are interesting events," Derek continued. "They bring together people from different parts of your life, different chapters, different contexts. Sometimes those worlds colliding can reveal unexpected things." He paused, and I felt a ripple of unease move through the head table. Today, I discovered that someone I've worked with closely for 3 years, someone whose expertise has been instrumental to my company's success, is actually a member of my new family. Guests murmured with interest. At the parents' table, I saw my mother's hand freeze halfway to her wine glass. My father's expression had gone carefully blank. "Natalie Preston," Derek said, gesturing toward where I sat, and suddenly 200 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. I've known her as N. Preston, the CEO of Cloud Nest Solutions, one of the most innovative cloud security companies in the Pacific Northwest. What I didn't know until this afternoon is that she's also Vanessa's sister. The murmurs grew louder. I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded in my lap, refusing to squirm under the sudden attention. I'm sharing this because I believe in giving credit where credit is due, Derek said. And because I think it's important, especially on a day celebrating family, to acknowledge the people who've made a real difference in our lives, whether we realize their connection to us or not. He raised his glass. To Natalie, whose brilliance has protected my business and whose presence today reminds me that family comes in many forms, including the ones we choose through mutual respect and shared values. He drank. Around the ballroom, guests lifted their glasses in confused but polite echo of the toast. At the parents' table, my father's face had gone from ruddy to pale. Several of his business associates were leaning toward him, clearly asking questions he couldn't comfortably answer. Mom had abandoned her wine entirely and was simply staring at her plate. Vanessa's smile had frozen into something brittle and sharp. She waited until Derek sat down, until the attention shifted away from the head table and conversations resumed, before leaning close to him. I couldn't hear what she said, but her lips barely moved and her expression never changed. Derek's response was equally subtle, his voice too low to carry, but his body language spoke volumes. He'd turned slightly away from her, creating a physical distance that matched whatever emotional gap had opened between them. The rest of dinner passed in a haze of awkward politeness. Servers cleared plates and brought dessert, an elaborate confection of chocolate and raspberry that probably cost more per slice than most people spent on an entire meal. Coffee and tea appeared. The wedding cake, a 5-tier masterpiece of fondant and sugar flowers, was wheeled out for the ceremonial cutting. Vanessa and Derek posed for photos, her hand over his on the knife, both smiling for the cameras while standing just far enough apart that their bodies didn't quite touch. I excused myself during the cake service, needing a moment away from the table, away from the weight of all those eyes. The estate had a library, according to the venue map in the welcome packet, and I found it down a quiet hallway away from the ballroom's noise. It was a small room, probably intended more for aesthetics than actual reading, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather chairs arranged around a fireplace. I sank into one of the chairs and closed my eyes, letting the silence wrap around me. This day had spiraled so far beyond anything I could have anticipated. I'd come expecting to be ignored, to fulfill my bridesmaid obligations and leave. Instead, I'd been publicly humiliated, unexpectedly defended, and thrust into a spotlight I'd spent years carefully avoiding. The door opened softly. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Derek's cologne, something woody and expensive, reached me before his footsteps did. "Mind if I hide in here with you for a minute?" he asked. I opened my eyes. He stood near the fireplace, his jacket removed, his tie loosened, looking like a man who desperately needed a break from his own wedding reception. "It's your venue," I said. "I'm just a guest." He laughed, but it was a tired sound. "Are you?" "A guest, I mean. Because from where I'm sitting, you seem more like an unexpected earthquake that's revealed all the fault lines I should have noticed before building my house." That's a tortured metaphor. It's been a tortured day. He moved to the chair opposite mine, sitting with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "I owe you an apology." That surprised me. For what? For not recognizing the situation sooner. For not questioning Vanessa's stories about her family more carefully. For assuming that someone who spoke with such dismissiveness about her sister must have had good reasons. He met my eyes. I've made my career by reading people, by understanding motivations and seeing through surface presentations. I should have seen this. "You saw what she wanted you to see," I said. "And to be fair, my family's dysfunction isn't exactly your responsibility to uncover. You were dating Vanessa, not investigating her. Still. I've heard her talk about you dozens of times over the past year. Always in passing, always with this tone that suggested you were somehow less than, somehow struggling, somehow in need of help you were too proud to accept." I believed her because I had no reason not to. He paused. And because, if I'm being honest, it made me feel good to think I was marrying someone generous enough to support her struggling sister. The honesty of that admission was almost painful. That's human nature. We like narratives that make us feel good about our choices. Maybe. But I'm trained to look beyond narratives, to question assumptions, to verify facts. In business, I would never accept a major claim without documentation. Yet in my personal life, I just accepted what I was told. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as his tell for frustration. Do you know what she told me this afternoon? When I confronted her about the seating arrangement comment? I wasn't sure I wanted to hear this, but I nodded anyway. She said you'd always been dramatic, always seeking attention, always making yourself the victim. She said the adopted child thing was something you used to manipulate people's sympathy. That you played it up to make the family look bad. He looked at me steadily. Then she said that even if you did own some small tech company, it was probably failing and you were too ashamed to admit it. That this whole thing at the wedding was probably your attempt to embarrass her on her special day because you were jealous of her success. The words should have hurt. Instead, they just felt predictable. That sounds like Vanessa. The thing is, Derek said slowly, I might have believed her. Even with everything Marcus showed me, even with the documentation, I might have convinced myself there was some explanation, some misunderstanding, some way to reconcile what I was hearing with what I thought I knew about my wife. He leaned back in the chair. But then I remembered something. About 6 months ago, we had a security crisis. Someone attempted to breach our system using a sophisticated phishing scheme. It happened on a Saturday night, around 11. I called the Cloud Nest emergency line, not expecting to reach anyone, just hoping to leave a message. I remembered that night. I'd been at my apartment, working on code for a different client, when the alert came through. You answered on the second ring, Derek continued. You walked me through the immediate steps to contain the breach, then stayed on the line with me for 3 hours while we systematically secured every entry point. You didn't have to do that. It wasn't in the contract. But you did it anyway because, as you said, protecting my business mattered more than your Saturday night plans. It's what any decent consultant would do. No, he said firmly. It's what someone with genuine integrity does. Someone who takes their commitments seriously. Someone who cares about doing the job right, not just doing the minimum required. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the darkened gardens. That's who I've been working with for 3 years. Someone competent, reliable, honest, and dedicated. Meanwhile, the woman I just married has apparently been lying to me about her family for our entire relationship. The pain in his voice was real. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for this man who'd walked into a marriage today only to discover that the foundation was built on misrepresentations and omissions. I don't know what to tell you, I said quietly. I don't know Vanessa's motivations for the stories she told. Maybe she believed them on some level. People have a remarkable capacity for self-deception when it serves their needs. Do you think she married me for my money? The question hung in the air between us. I considered lying, considered offering some comforting platitude, but Derek deserved better than that. I think Vanessa has always been very focused on status and security, I said carefully. She was raised in a household that valued appearances, that measured worth in material terms, that taught her that success meant having the right address, the right car, the right connections. You represent all of that. Whether that's the only reason she married you, I can't say. I don't know her well enough anymore, if I ever did. Derek nodded slowly, still staring out at the darkness. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. About? About everything. About this marriage that started with me learning my wife has been lying about her family. About the fact that I apparently have better professional rapport with my sister-in-law than personal connection with my wife. About whether any of this can be salvaged or if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. Those aren't decisions you need to make tonight, I said gently. Tonight, you finish the reception, you smile for the photos, you do the first dance and cut the cake. Tomorrow, when the guests are gone and the venue is cleaned and reality sets back in, that's when you figure out the hard stuff. He turned back toward me. That's very pragmatic advice. I'm a pragmatic person. Is that how you've survived in your family? By being pragmatic? I considered the question. I've survived by building a life outside my family. By creating success that doesn't depend on their approval or support. By understanding that some relationships are simply transactional, and once you accept that, they hurt less. That sounds lonely. Sometimes, I admitted. But loneliness is better than constantly being disappointed by people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Derek moved back to the chair, sitting down heavily. I should get back to the reception. People will notice I'm gone. Probably. Though Vanessa seems to be managing the hosting duties just fine without you. She's good at that. Performing, I mean. Being whatever the situation requires. It's a useful skill. Until it isn't. He stood, straightening his tie, putting his jacket back on, reassembling the groom persona. Thank you, Natalie. For staying, for sitting at the head table, for not making this more complicated than it already is. You stood up for me when my family wouldn't, I said. That's not something I'll forget. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. Can I ask you something? And I want an honest answer. All right. If you'd known I was marrying Vanessa before today, would you have said something? Would you have warned me? I thought about it, really thought about it. Honestly? Probably not. It would have seemed like jealousy or vindictiveness. And besides, what would I have said? Your fiancé is dismissive of her adopted sister? Your fiancé values status and appearance? Those aren't crimes. Lots of people have complicated family dynamics. Who was I to interfere in someone else's relationship based on my own negative experiences? Even knowing that I was walking into something built on lies? I didn't know they were lies to you. For all I knew, you knew exactly who Vanessa was and loved her anyway. Some people are fine with partners who prioritize appearances. Some relationships thrive on surface-level compatibility. I met his eyes. And some of us aren't qualified to give relationship advice, given that we've systematically avoided relationships precisely because we don't trust people enough to be vulnerable with them. That last part had come out more honest than I'd intended. Derek's expression softened into something like understanding. Fair enough, he said quietly. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with the leather chairs and the unread books and the weight of a day that had fundamentally altered several lives in ways we were only beginning to understand. I stayed in the library for another 10 minutes, gathering myself, preparing to return to the reception and fulfill the last of my bridesmaid obligations. Through the walls, I could hear music starting, the DJ announcing the first dance, guests applauding. The performance continued, perfect and beautiful and hollow. When I finally returned to the ballroom, Vanessa and Derek were on the dance floor, moving through a carefully choreographed waltz while guests watched and phones captured every moment for social media. They looked perfect together, like something out of a magazine, like exactly the kind of couple that belonged at a 15-acre estate wedding. But I'd seen behind the performance now. I'd seen Derek's face in the library, seen the cracks forming, seen the moment when fairy tales collided with reality. And I knew that whatever happened next, this day would be remembered not as the perfect wedding Vanessa had planned, but as the day when carefully constructed lies began their inevitable collapse. The music shifted to something upbeat and the dance floor filled with guests eager to celebrate. I remained at the periphery, nursing a glass of water and watching the choreographed joy unfold. Vanessa moved through the crowd like a queen among subjects, her dress catching the light with every turn, her laughter perfectly timed, her gratitude expressed to each guest with practiced sincerity. She was in her element, the center of attention, the star of her own carefully produced show. Brandon found me near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the vineyard. The sun had fully set now, and tiny lights twinkled in the rows of grapevines like earthbound stars. He handed me a fresh glass of champagne without asking if I wanted it. You don't have to stay, he said. I think you've gone above and beyond the call of sisterly duty at this point. I took the champagne but didn't drink it. Leaving now would cause more drama than staying. Besides, I already told Derek I'd stay through dinner. I keep my commitments. Even when the commitment is to a family that doesn't deserve it. I glanced at my brother. His tie was fully loosened now, his jacket abandoned somewhere, and there was something different in his expression. Guilt, maybe. Or the beginning of awareness that comes when comfortable illusions start to crumble. Especially then, I said. If I only kept commitments to people who treated me well, I'd have walked away from the Preston family years ago. But that would have meant proving them right, proving that I wasn't really part of the family, that the adoption never really took. So I stayed. I showed up. I fulfilled the obligations even when they weren't reciprocated. Brandon leaned against the window frame. That's exhausting just to hear about. Actually living it must have been hell. It had its moments. Why didn't you just cut us off? Once you had your company established, once you had money and success, why not just disappear? Change your number, move away, start fresh without the baggage? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself more than once during particularly difficult family gatherings. Because cutting people off completely would have meant they won. It would have meant they succeeded in making me feel like I didn't belong, like I was only conditionally part of the family. By staying, by continuing to show up even when it hurt, I was proving to myself that I was strong enough to endure their rejection without letting it define me. That's either incredibly mature or incredibly masochistic. Probably both. I finally took a sip of the champagne. It was excellent, dry and crisp with tiny bubbles that dissolved on my tongue. The thing about being adopted is that you're always aware, on some level, that your place in the family is different. You weren't born into it. Someone chose to bring you in. And that means someone could, theoretically, choose to push you out. So you're always proving yourself, always trying to earn your place, always aware that your belonging is conditional in ways that biological children never have to think about. That's not true though, Brandon said quietly. The adoption was legal. You're as much a Preston as I am. Legally, sure. But emotionally? Socially? Look at today, Brandon. Look at what Vanessa said, what Mom and Dad allowed, what everyone accepted as normal. Adopted family sits in the back. That's not about legal paperwork. That's about how this family actually sees me. He didn't have an answer for that. We stood in silence for a moment, watching guests laugh and dance and celebrate a marriage that already felt precarious. Can I tell you something? Brandon said eventually. Something I've never told anyone? I looked at him, surprised by the sudden vulnerability in his voice. All right. I was jealous of you. He said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. When Mom and Dad first adopted you, I was 8 years old. Suddenly there was this girl who got all the attention, all the concern, all the careful handling because she'd been through trauma and needed extra care. Everyone was always asking how Natalie was adjusting, whether Natalie was happy, if Natalie needed anything. And I was just expected to understand and be supportive and not cause problems. I'd never considered that perspective. In my memories, Brandon had always been the secure one, the biological child who never had to worry about his place in the family. So I started pulling away, he continued. Not in any obvious way. Just enough to protect myself from caring too much about someone who might leave. Because that's what they told us, remember? That adoption sometimes doesn't work out, that if you didn't adjust well you might have to go to a different family. So I kept my distance, built walls, convinced myself I didn't need a sister anyway. He laughed bitterly. And then years passed and the walls just stayed there. Even after it was clear you weren't going anywhere, even after the adoption was finalized and permanent, I'd already established the pattern. It was easier to maintain the distance than to try to build something real. I never knew that, I said softly. How could you? I was 8, then 10, then a teenager too cool to care about family stuff. By the time I was old enough to recognize what I'd done, it felt too late to change it. And then Vanessa's attitude toward you became the default, and Dad's dismissiveness became normal, and I just went along with it because challenging it would have meant admitting I'd been wrong for years. You were a child, Brandon. You can't be held responsible for emotional self-protection you developed as an 8-year-old. Maybe not then. But I'm 30 now. I've had a lot of years to make different choices and I didn't. He turned to face me fully. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me or to excuse anything. I just want you to know that the distance between us wasn't because of anything lacking in you. It was my own fear and immaturity and cowardice. And I'm sorry for it. 2 apologies in one day from a family that had never apologized for anything. The wedding was turning into something stranger than I could have imagined. Thank you for telling me that, I said. It helps, actually. To understand the context. Does it change anything? I considered the question. I don't know yet. Today has been a lot. I need time to process all of it before I know what anything means or what I want moving forward. Brandon nodded. That's fair. Just so you know, though, I meant what I said earlier. I want to do better. I want to actually get to know my sister instead of just existing in the same family tree. If you're willing to give me that chance. Before I could respond, a commotion near the head table drew our attention. Vanessa's voice, raised above the music and conversation, carried across the ballroom with crystalline clarity. I don't care what you think you discovered today, this is my wedding and I will not have you making it about anyone else. The music continued but conversations faltered as guests turned to look. Derek stood beside the head table, his expression carved from stone, while Vanessa faced him with her hands on her hips and her perfect composure finally cracking. I'm not making it about anyone else, Derek said, his voice level but carrying an edge that suggested barely controlled anger. I'm simply pointing out that we have some serious conversations ahead of us about honesty and respect and what those words actually mean in a marriage. This is not the time or place for this discussion. Then when is? On our honeymoon? After we get back? At what point do we address the fact that you've been lying about your family for our entire relationship? Guests had stopped even pretending to dance now. The DJ, sensing disaster, had lowered the music to barely audible background levels. The ballroom had transformed into an audience watching a private conflict become devastatingly public. Vanessa's face cycled through several expressions before landing on wounded innocence. I never lied. I simply didn't share every difficult detail about my complicated family dynamics. That's not the same thing. You told me your sister was struggling financially and needed support. She did struggle. She's always been difficult and withdrawn and refused help even when she clearly needed it. She built a $50 million company, Vanessa. That's not struggling. That's succeeding spectacularly while you apparently told everyone she was barely keeping her head above water. I didn't know about the company, Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its conviction. She kept it secret from everyone. She didn't keep it secret. You just never bothered to ask about her life beyond your assumptions. Derek ran his hand through his hair again, that gesture of frustration now taking on an air of finality. And the thing about the adoption, about adopted family sitting in the back, about her not being real family. Do you understand how that sounds? Do you understand what it says about your character? I was joking. No, you weren't. I've spoken to multiple people who heard you say it. The wedding planner confirmed it was given as an actual instruction. Your own mother didn't deny it when I asked her about it. He took a breath. And even if it had been a joke, which we both know it wasn't, what kind of person jokes about treating their sister as less than human because she was adopted? Vanessa's carefully constructed mask was disintegrating in real time. Her face flushed with anger and embarrassment, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her champagne glass and then thought better of it. You're making a scene, she hissed. You're humiliating me in front of everyone. I'm making a scene. Derek's laugh was sharp and humorless. Vanessa, you humiliated your sister in front of 200 people. You relegated her to an overflow section like she was a vendor who didn't deserve a real seat. And when I tried to correct that, when I tried to give her the respect she deserved, you spent the entire evening pouting and making passive-aggressive comments about attention-seeking and drama. At the parents' table, Richard Preston had risen to his feet, clearly intending to intervene. Catherine had her hand on his arm, trying to hold him back, but he pulled away and started toward the head table with the determined stride of a man used to fixing problems through force of personality. "That's enough," Richard said, his voice booming across the ballroom. "Derek, I understand you're upset, but this is neither the time nor the place. Let's take this conversation somewhere private. With all due respect, Mr. Preston, I don't think private conversations with this family have been particularly productive today." Derek turned to face his new father-in-law. "In fact, I'm beginning to think that the Preston family's preference for keeping things private, for maintaining appearances regardless of truth, is a significant part of the problem." Richard's face darkened. "You watch your tone, young man. I don't know what Natalie has been telling you, but she has a long history of causing problems and playing the victim." "Actually, Natalie hasn't told me anything beyond basic facts," Derek said. "Everything I know about how this family treats her has come from direct observation and from your own family's words and actions. She's been remarkably diplomatic about the whole situation, far more than I would be in her position." "She's always been good at manipulation," Vanessa interjected. "At making herself look innocent while making everyone else look bad. This whole thing today, the surprise reveal about her company, the timing of it, all of it was calculated to ruin my wedding. I'd been content to remain a spectator to this disaster, but that accusation finally pushed me past my tolerance threshold." I set down my champagne glass and crossed the ballroom, aware of every eye tracking my movement. When I reached the head table, I kept my voice calm and clear. "I'm going to say this once, and then I'm leaving, and all of you can figure out your own mess without me." I looked directly at Vanessa. "I did not plan any of this. I did not orchestrate some grand reveal. I came to your wedding, sat where I was told to sit, and tried to be as invisible as possible because that's what I've learned to do at Preston family events. The only reason anyone knows about Cloud Nest is because your husband recognized me from 3 years of professional collaboration that neither of us knew about." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. You said that adopted family sits in the back because this day is about blood, about real family. That told me everything I needed to know about how you actually view me, despite 20 years of living under the same roof. And that's fine. You're entitled to your feelings. But don't stand here now and accuse me of manipulation when all I did was exist in the same space where your carefully constructed lies fell apart." I turned to Richard. "And you, Dad, have spent my entire life dismissing my achievements and minimizing my worth. My degree wasn't in the right field. My job wasn't impressive enough. My choices weren't what you would have made. Nothing I ever did was quite good enough to earn your approval. So forgive me if I didn't feel the need to inform you when I finally achieved something you couldn't dismiss or diminish. I built Cloud Nest in spite of this family's lack of support, not because of it." Catherine had joined the group now, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Natalie, please, you're misunderstanding everything. We love you. I know you do, Mom. In your own way, you love me. But love without respect, love without genuine interest, love that's conditional on my willingness to stay small and quiet and grateful, that's not enough. That's never been enough." The ballroom had gone completely silent. Guests stood frozen with drinks halfway to their lips, forks suspended over half-eaten cake. The string quartet had long since given up any pretense of providing background music. We might as well have been performing on a stage. Derek stepped closer to me, his voice low. "You don't have to do this here. We can go somewhere private." "No," I said. "Because private is where this family hides truth. Private is where they rug sweep and gaslight and rewrite history until everyone starts to doubt their own perceptions. If I'm going to say this, I'm going to say it where witnesses can confirm I actually said it, where it can't be later dismissed as my imagination or my tendency toward drama." I took a breath and addressed the assembled guests who'd come expecting a celebration and instead gotten a family implosion. "Most of you don't know me. I'm the adopted daughter who exists at the edges of Preston family photos and gets mentioned in passing at social events. Some of you probably assumed I was troubled or difficult because that's the narrative this family has carefully cultivated over the years. The truth is simpler and sadder. I was never given a real chance to belong. The adoption gave me a legal place in this family but not an emotional one. And I've spent 20 years trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Marcus Chen had moved to stand beside Derek, a silent show of support that didn't go unnoticed. Brandon remained by the window, his expression stricken. Several of Vanessa's bridesmaids looked deeply uncomfortable, their carefully applied makeup unable to hide their shock. I founded Cloud Nest Solutions 8 years ago with money my grandmother Helen left me, I continued. She was the only person in this family who ever believed I was capable of something significant. She told me that success was the best response to people who underestimated you, and she was right. I built a company that serves clients across 17 states. I employ 43 people who depend on me for their livelihoods. I've created something real and valuable and sustainable. And I did it all without asking this family for a single dollar or a single ounce of support. Richard's face had gone from angry red to ashen gray. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? I tried to tell you, Dad. Multiple times over the years. You dismissed it as my little computer hobby. Mom suggested I focus on finding a husband instead. Vanessa called it cute when I mentioned hiring my first employees. After a while, I stopped trying to share my success with people who were determined not to see it. Catherine reached toward me, her hand trembling. We didn't understand. We didn't know it was important. Everything I did was important, Mom. Every achievement, every milestone, every success mattered. It mattered to me. But it was never the right kind of success for this family. It wasn't prestigious enough, traditional enough, impressive enough by Preston standards. So it got dismissed and diminished until I learned to just keep my life separate from my family. Vanessa finally found her voice again, though it emerged smaller and less certain than before. You made us look like fools. You let us believe one thing while you were secretly building this whole other life. I didn't make you look like anything, Vanessa. I just stopped trying to correct your assumptions. There's a difference. I softened my voice slightly. You're my sister. I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted Mom and Dad to celebrate my achievements. I wanted Brandon to see me as someone worth knowing. But none of that happened, so I built a life where success didn't depend on this family's approval. That's not manipulation. That's survival. Derek cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I think what you've accomplished is remarkable. And I'm sorry that your own family can't see it. Thank you, I said quietly. And I'm sorry your wedding turned into this. You deserved better than to have your marriage start with these revelations. The revelations were there whether they came out today or 6 months from now, he said. Better to know the truth early than to build a life on false foundations. He was looking at Vanessa when he said it, and the implication was clear. Around the ballroom, guests were beginning to whisper, phones were being discreetly checked for rideshare apps, and the celebration that had started with such promise was dissolving into awkwardness and speculation. Diane Foster appeared at my elbow, her professional composure intact despite the chaos. Miss Preston, your car can be brought around whenever you're ready. I nodded gratefully. Thank you, Diane. I'm ready now. As I turned to leave, Brandon crossed the ballroom and caught my arm gently. Wait. Please. Can we talk? Really talk, I mean. Not here, not now, but soon. I searched his face for signs of obligation or performance but found only genuine distress and what looked like actual remorse. Maybe, I said. I need some time to process everything first. But maybe. That's more than I deserve, he said. I'll take it. I walked through the ballroom one final time, aware of every whispered comment and sidelong glance but refusing to hurry or hide. Grandma Helen's voice echoed in my memory. You hold your head up and you walk like you own the ground beneath your feet, because you do. You belong everywhere you choose to stand. The cool night air hit my face as I exited the estate, and I drew in a deep breath that felt like the first real air I'd breathed all day. The valet brought my car around, that sensible 10-year-old sedan that ran perfectly and cost me nothing in car payments because I'd bought it outright. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My makeup had held up remarkably well. My hair was still in its elaborate curls. I looked like someone who'd just attended a beautiful wedding. I looked like someone who'd survived. The drive back to Seattle would take about 3 hours. 3 hours of highway and darkness and blessed solitude to begin processing what had just happened. I'd come to Portland expecting humiliation and got vindication. I'd come prepared to be invisible and ended up at the center of a family catastrophe. I'd come thinking I knew exactly how the day would unfold and instead watched every assumption I had about my family and my place in it get systematically dismantled. As I pulled out of the Grandview Estate's circular driveway, I passed several guests making their own early exits. Through the venue's windows, I could see the reception continuing in some diminished form, Vanessa still in her wedding dress, Derek's expression unreadable from this distance, my parents clustered together in what looked like intense conversation. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or victorious or any of the emotions you're supposed to feel when people who've wronged you are finally confronted with truth. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired and sad and oddly hollow, like something that had been lodged in my chest for 20 years had finally been removed, leaving behind an empty space I didn't yet know how to fill. My phone buzzed as I merged onto the highway. A text from Brandon, "Drive safe. Let me know when you're home." Another from Marcus Chin, "If you ever want to grab coffee and talk business without family drama, I'd be honored. Derek's a good guy who's going to need some time to figure things out. But your work speaks for itself." And finally, one from a number I didn't recognize but suspected was Derek, "Thank you for your honesty tonight. I'm sorry it was necessary. I hope we can maintain our professional relationship regardless of how the personal situation resolves. Your company is too valuable to lose over my poor judgment in relationships." I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty, and I let the miles accumulate between me and the wreckage of the day. Somewhere around the halfway point, when the lights of Portland had faded behind me and Seattle's glow hadn't yet appeared ahead, I pulled into a rest stop and finally let myself cry. Not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. Because in 20 years, my family had never once looked at me the way Derek had looked at me tonight when he said my company was remarkable. They'd never shown the genuine interest Brandon had shown when he asked about my life. They'd never acknowledged that I might have value beyond my ability to fit quietly into their predetermined narrative. I cried because grief and relief feel remarkably similar when they hit you at the same time. And then I dried my eyes, got back in my car, and drove the rest of the way home to the small apartment and the sensible life and the company I'd built from nothing but determination and my grandmother's faith. Tomorrow, I'd figure out what came next. Tonight, I just needed to survive the drive. The Monday morning sun filtered through my apartment windows, casting geometric patterns across my desk where 3 monitors displayed various security dashboards for Cloud Nest's active clients. I'd made it home around midnight Saturday, slept fitfully for a few hours, and spent most of Sunday in a haze of exhaustion and emotional processing. Now, sitting in my home office with a cup of coffee going cold beside my keyboard, I was attempting to return to the routine that had sustained me for 8 years. Work was simple. Work made sense. Work didn't require me to navigate the minefield of family dynamics or question my worth based on other people's inability to see it. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since I'd turned it back on Sunday afternoon. Texts from Brandon asking if I was all right. Multiple missed calls from my mother. A few messages from people I vaguely recognized as wedding guests, probably looking for gossip or clarification about what they'd witnessed. I'd ignored all of it, focusing instead on client emails and system updates and the comfortable predictability of code and security protocols. The door buzzer interrupted my concentration just after 9. I wasn't expecting anyone, and delivery drivers usually just left packages in the lobby. I considered ignoring it, but the buzzer sounded again, more insistent this time. Through the intercom, a familiar voice crackled. "Natalie? It's Marcus Chen. I have coffee and pastries and a business proposition that has nothing to do with wedding drama. Can I come up?" I hesitated, my finger hovering over the button. Marcus represented Cloud Nest's largest client, but he was also Derek's business partner and therefore connected to the family catastrophe I was trying to forget. Still, he'd driven from Portland to Seattle on a Monday morning, and turning him away felt needlessly hostile. "Fifth floor," I said, pressing the button to unlock the building entrance. 3 minutes later, Marcus stood in my doorway holding 2 coffee cups and a bag from a bakery I recognized as one of Seattle's best. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking nothing like the put-together best man from Saturday's wedding. "I come in peace," he said, raising the coffee cups like a white flag. "And I promise this is about business, not about what happened at the reception." I stepped aside to let him in. My apartment was small but carefully organized, every surface clear, every object in its designated place. The living room doubled as additional office space, with filing cabinets along one wall and a whiteboard covered in diagrams for a new security protocol I'd been developing. "Nice setup," Marcus said, his eyes taking in the dual-purpose space. "Very efficient. I don't need much room. Most of my work is digital anyway." I accepted the coffee he offered. "What's the business proposition?" He set the pastry bag on my desk and settled into the one client chair I kept for the rare occasions when meetings happened at my apartment instead of Cloud Nest's actual office downtown. "Derek and I have been planning an expansion for Hamilton Enterprises. We're looking at acquiring 3 commercial properties in California, which means we'll need significantly upgraded security infrastructure across multiple locations simultaneously. It's a complex project, probably 6 months of intensive work." "That sounds like something we'd normally discuss over email and video calls," I said. "You didn't need to drive to Seattle for it." "True. But given everything that happened Saturday, I wanted to make sure you understood that Hamilton Enterprises still wants to work with Cloud Nest. That our professional relationship is completely separate from whatever personal issues are unfolding between Derek and his new wife." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "Derek's a good man who's currently dealing with some difficult realizations about his marriage. But he's also a smart businessman who knows better than to let personal complications interfere with professional partnerships that work." "I appreciate the clarification," I said. "Though I have to ask, how bad is it?" "The marriage situation, I mean." Marcus sighed. "I probably shouldn't discuss my business partner's personal life. But since you're technically family now, and since you were present for the initial implosion, I'll say this: Derek spent most of Sunday questioning every conversation he's had with Vanessa over the past year. He's replaying interactions, looking for other signs he might have missed, wondering what else she's been dishonest about. It's not a great way to start a marriage." "No, I imagine it isn't. He's also angry with himself for not seeing it sooner. For not questioning the narrative about you more carefully. For not doing basic due diligence on the family he was marrying into." Marcus leaned forward. "Can I ask you something? And I want you to know I'm asking from genuine curiosity, not judgment." "Go ahead. How did you deal with it? 20 years of being underestimated and dismissed by the people who should have supported you most. How did you not become bitter or give up?" It was a more perceptive question than I'd expected. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, feeling its warmth seep into my palms. "I compartmentalized," I said after a moment. "I built a life where my family's opinion didn't matter. Where success was measured by metrics they couldn't dismiss or diminish. Client satisfaction, revenue growth, employee retention, these are objective measures. Either my company works or it doesn't. Either my security protocols hold or they don't. There's no room for interpretation or dismissal based on who I am versus what I've accomplished. That's remarkably healthy, actually. Or remarkably avoidant, depending on your perspective." I essentially gave up on having a real family relationship and poured all that energy into building something I could control. I took a sip of the coffee. It was excellent, the kind of carefully sourced single-origin blend that cost twice what normal coffee cost. My grandmother Helen used to say that living well was the best revenge. I don't think she meant it as literally as I took it, but it worked. Every success, every new client, every positive review, it all became evidence that I was worth something regardless of what the Preston family thought. And now? After everything that came out at the wedding? I considered the question. Now I have to figure out what comes next. Whether there's any relationship with my family worth salvaging, or if the healthiest thing is to maintain the professional distance I've already established. Brandon seems genuinely remorseful. My parents seem confused more than anything. And Vanessa, well, Vanessa is dealing with her own consequences. Marcus nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think Derek would like to get to know you better. The actual you, I mean, not just the voice on the other end of business calls. He respects competence and integrity, and you've demonstrated both consistently for 3 years. The family connection complicates things, obviously, but I think he sees potential for something like friendship once the immediate crisis settles. That's assuming his marriage survives the immediate crisis. Fair point. Marcus stood, clearly preparing to leave. Anyway, I wanted to deliver the message in person that Cloud Nest is still our preferred security partner. We'll send over the expansion project details by the end of the week. If you're interested, we can set up planning meetings for early next month. I'm interested, I said. And Marcus? Thank you for coming. You didn't have to, but I appreciate that you did. Professional relationships are built on trust, he said simply. I wanted you to know ours hasn't changed. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the monitors without really seeing them. The coffee was excellent. The pastries, which I eventually opened, were even better. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and confusion, I felt the first stirrings of something that might eventually become clarity. My phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. Another text from Brandon: Mom and Dad want to talk. Would you be willing to meet for dinner this week? No pressure, but I think they're starting to understand some things. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, maybe. I need a few more days. His reply came immediately: take all the time you need. I'll keep them from showing up at your apartment uninvited. That almost made me smile. Brandon was trying, genuinely trying, to build something that had never existed between us. Whether that effort would translate into an actual relationship remained to be seen, but the attempt itself was more than I'd expected. The week progressed with surprising normalcy. Work continued, clients needed support, my team handled routine maintenance while I focused on the proposal for Hamilton Enterprises' expansion project. I'd hired carefully over the years, bringing on people who shared my philosophy about security: thorough, proactive, and always thinking 3 steps ahead of potential threats. My chief technology officer, a woman named Patricia who'd worked at Microsoft for 15 years before getting fed up with corporate bureaucracy, stopped by my office Wednesday afternoon with questions about the California project. This is significantly larger than our usual contracts, she said, reviewing the preliminary specifications Marcus had sent over. We'll need to bring on at least 2 more people, maybe 3, to handle the workload without compromising our existing clients. Agreed. Start putting out feelers for candidates. We're looking for people with commercial property experience and someone who can handle the regulatory compliance side of multi-state operations. Patricia made notes on her tablet. How's Derek Hamilton doing, by the way? I heard there was some drama at his wedding. Word traveled fast in Seattle's tech community. I shouldn't have been surprised that people had heard something, though I hoped the details remained vague. He's processing some unexpected information about his new wife's family, I said carefully. But it doesn't affect our professional relationship. Good. Hamilton Enterprises is a solid client. Be ashamed to lose them over personal stuff. She paused. Though I have to say, the rumors about you being related to his wife and also secretly running a $50 million company are pretty wild. Please tell me the $50 million company part is at least true, because that would be an impressive secret to keep. I couldn't help but laugh. The company valuation is accurate. The secretly running it part is less so. I've never hidden Cloud Nest. I just didn't advertise my personal life to family who wasn't particularly interested. Family dynamics are complicated, Patricia said diplomatically. My sister didn't speak to me for 2 years because I got promoted over her boyfriend. These things happen. After she left, I found myself thinking about the difference between chosen family and biological family. My team at Cloud Nest, the 43 people who worked for the company I'd built, they knew me. They understood what I valued, how I operated, what I was trying to accomplish. We'd built trust through consistent action and mutual respect. Meanwhile, the family I'd been adopted into 20 years ago still seemed surprised to discover I was competent and successful. Thursday evening, I finally responded to my mother's increasingly desperate messages by agreeing to meet for coffee Friday afternoon. Not dinner, which felt too intimate and prolonged, but coffee at a neutral location where either of us could leave if the conversation became unbearable. Catherine Preston arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I watched her through the window as I approached, saw her checking her phone anxiously, adjusting her scarf, ordering something from the counter and then apparently changing her mind. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, though maybe that was just the context shift. I was used to seeing her in the Preston family home, where she moved with the confidence of someone in their own domain. Here, in a downtown Seattle coffee shop, she seemed uncertain and out of place. "Natalie," she said when I entered, standing so quickly she nearly knocked over the chair beside her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted. We ordered coffee, found a table in the back corner away from the afternoon crowd, and sat in awkward silence for a moment. "I don't know where to start," Catherine finally said. "Your father wanted to come, but Brandon thought it might be better if it was just me first. Less overwhelming. Brandon's probably right." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, a gesture I recognized as my own habit. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Saturday. About how we've treated you, about assumptions we made, about opportunities we missed to really know you." Her voice cracked slightly. "I failed you, Natalie. As a mother, as a parent, as a basic human being, I failed you." I hadn't expected such direct acknowledgement. In my experience, the Preston family preferred to smooth over conflict with vague pleasantries and the unspoken agreement to never discuss difficult things directly. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "I mean it. I've been trying to understand how we got here, how 20 years passed without me really seeing you. And I think maybe I was scared." She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. "When we adopted you, you were this traumatized 8-year-old who'd lost everything. Your biological parents had died, you'd been in foster care, you were so quiet and careful, like you were afraid to take up any space at all. And I wanted so badly to fix you, to make you whole, to be the perfect adoptive mother who healed all your wounds. Mom, I don't think this is, please, let me finish." She took a shaky breath. "But you didn't need fixing. You needed acceptance and support and genuine interest in who you were becoming. Instead, I projected all my own insecurities onto you. When you were quiet, I assumed you were struggling instead of just being introverted. When you chose different paths than I would have chosen, I assumed you were lost instead of following your own navigation. And when you succeeded in ways I didn't understand, I dismissed it because accepting your success would have meant admitting I'd been wrong about you for years." The coffee shop noise swirled around us, conversations and espresso machines and the clink of cups, but our corner felt isolated and intense. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because Saturday was the first time I actually saw you. Not the version of you I'd constructed in my head, not the adopted daughter who needed my help, but the actual person you'd become despite my failure to see it. And it broke something in me, Natalie. It broke the comfortable narrative I'd been telling myself about our family, about being a good mother, about having done my best." "You did do your best," I said quietly. "That's what makes this so complicated. I don't think you were intentionally cruel or deliberately dismissive. I think you genuinely believed the stories you told yourself about me. But that doesn't change the impact those stories had." Catherine nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I want to do better. I want to actually know my daughter instead of the idea of her I'd been carrying around. But I don't know if that's possible, or if I've done too much damage, or if you even want that kind of relationship with me." It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Part of me wanted to maintain the walls I'd built, to protect myself from further disappointment by keeping the relationship safely superficial. But another part, the part that still remembered being 8 years old and desperately wanting to belong, wanted to believe that change was possible. I don't know either, I admitted. I don't know if we can build something real after 20 years of something false. But I'm willing to try, if you are. Slowly. With realistic expectations and clear boundaries. I'll take that, Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. Whatever you're willing to give, I'll take it. We talked for another hour, carefully navigating years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. She asked about Cloud Nest, really asked, wanting to understand not just what the company did but how I'd built it, what challenges I'd faced, what I was proud of. I asked about her life, realizing I knew almost nothing about her beyond her role as Richard Preston's wife and Vanessa's mother. She'd wanted to be a teacher before marriage and children had redirected her path. She'd given up a graduate school acceptance to support my father's early career. She'd spent 30 years building a life around other people's ambitions and had lost track of her own somewhere in the process. We're more alike than I realized, she said as we prepared to leave. Both of us figuring out who we are apart from the roles other people assigned us. Maybe, I said. Though you might want to start by figuring out who you are apart from Dad's expectations. That seems like a necessary first step. She smiled sadly. Your father is dealing with his own realizations. He's not handling them particularly well, but he's trying. In his own Richard Preston way. We parted with an agreement to meet again in 2 weeks, to continue the slow process of building something authentic from the ruins of what had been. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, not yet, but it was a beginning. And after 20 years of false starts and missed connections, a genuine beginning felt almost revolutionary. That night, alone in my apartment with the city lights spread below my windows, I thought about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you build. My biological parents had died when I was 7, a car accident that had instantly rewritten my entire world. The Prestons had adopted me a year later, giving me stability and security and a legal place to belong. But belonging on paper and belonging in truth had proven to be very different things. Cloud Nest, in many ways, had become my real family. The people who worked there, who shared my vision and values, who showed up consistently and contributed to something larger than themselves, they were the ones who knew me. Patricia, who brought me coffee when she knew I'd been working late. James, our lead security analyst, who sent funny memes when he sensed the team needed a morale boost. Claire, our youngest hire, who'd cried in my office when I'd promoted her because no one had ever believed in her potential before. These were the people who'd seen me build something from nothing and had chosen to build it with me. They were the family I'd assembled through choice and mutual respect rather than accident of birth or legal proceeding. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. I know this is complicated given everything that's happened, but I wanted you to know that Vanessa and I have separated. She's staying at her parents' house while we figure out next steps. I'm telling you because our professional relationship matters to me, and I don't want you to hear about this through family gossip. Our work together continues regardless of what happens with the marriage. I stared at the message for a long time. 4 days. They'd made it 4 days before the marriage had collapsed under the weight of revealed truths. Part of me felt guilty, as if my presence at the wedding had somehow caused this outcome. But the rational part understood that I hadn't created the problems in their relationship. I'd simply been the catalyst that exposed them. I typed back, "Thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry you're going through this. Take whatever time you need. Cloud Nest will be here when you're ready to focus on the expansion project." His response came quickly, "Appreciate that. And Natalie? For what it's worth, I'm glad I finally got to meet Preston in person. You're exactly as impressive as your work suggested." I set the phone down and returned to the window, watching the city breathe and pulse below me. Somewhere out there, my sister was probably crafting a narrative about how I'd ruined her marriage, about how my dramatic revelation at the wedding had destroyed her happiness. My parents were likely trying to process how their adopted daughter had succeeded so spectacularly while they'd been convinced she was struggling. Brandon was hopefully continuing his own journey toward becoming someone capable of genuine relationship instead of performative distance. And Derek, a man I'd worked with for 3 years without ever meeting, was discovering that the foundation he'd built his marriage on had been constructed from assumptions and omissions rather than truth. None of it was simple. None of it was clean. Family never was, whether biological or chosen or some complicated hybrid of the two. But for the first time in 20 years, I felt like I was moving towards something honest rather than away from something painful. The difference was subtle but significant. Tomorrow, I'd return to work on the California expansion project. I'd hire the new team members we needed. I'd continue building the company that had given me purpose and identity when family had provided neither. But tonight, I allowed myself to sit with the complexity of it all, the grief and relief and cautious hope that comes when carefully constructed walls start to come down. The coffee Marcus had brought Monday morning had been excellent. The conversation with my mother Friday afternoon had been painful but necessary. And the message from Derek confirming his marriage's failure felt like the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been heading toward collapse long before I'd accidentally triggered its ending. I pulled up my laptop and opened a new document. For years, I'd kept meticulous records of Cloud Nest's growth, documenting every client milestone and business achievement. But I'd never written about the personal journey, the parallel story of building myself while building a company. Maybe it was time to start. Not for publication or public consumption, but for my own understanding of how I'd gotten from that 8-year-old adopted girl to this 28-year-old CEO who'd accidentally blown up a wedding by simply existing. The cursor blinked on the empty page, waiting. Outside, Seattle continued its Friday night rhythms, people heading to dinners and bars and whatever connections sustained them. Inside, I began to type, trying to capture something true about families and belonging and the complicated math of worth and recognition. I wrote until midnight, until my coffee had gone cold and my back ached from sitting too long in one position. I wrote about grandmother Helen and her quiet faith in my potential. About the loneliness of success that no one acknowledges. About the specific pain of being invisible in your own family while being recognized by strangers. About building Cloud Nest as both professional achievement and personal salvation. When I finally stopped, the document was 12 pages long and far more honest than I'd intended it to be. I saved it in a password-protected folder, unsure if I'd ever read it again or if the exercise had been purely cathartic. Then I shut down my laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed in the small apartment that had been my sanctuary for 8 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new attempts at building something authentic from the wreckage of Saturday's revelations. But tonight, I'd done enough. Tonight, I could rest in the knowledge that whatever came next, I'd face it as myself rather than as the diminished version my family had preferred. And that difference, that shift from performing acceptable smallness to claiming actual space, felt like its own kind of victory. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of Cloud Nest's new expanded office space in downtown Seattle. We'd moved from our modest suite to an entire floor, accommodating the 12 new employees we'd hired to handle the California expansion and 3 additional major contracts that had materialized after word spread about our work with Hamilton Enterprises. Growth had been exponential, almost overwhelming, but the team had risen to meet it with the same dedication that had characterized Cloud Nest from the beginning. I stood in my new office, larger than my entire apartment's living space, looking at the framed photograph Patricia had given me as a moving-in gift. It showed the whole team at our first company picnic last month, 45 people gathered in a park, laughing and relaxed, the kind of candid shot that captured genuine connection rather than staged professionalism. These were the people who'd chosen to build something with me, who showed up every day committed to excellence and mutual respect. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. He'd been consistent over the past 6 months, reaching out weekly, never pushing but always present. We'd had coffee 4 times, dinner twice, and one slightly awkward but ultimately meaningful conversation about our childhood and the walls we'd both built. He was trying, genuinely trying, and slowly something like actual siblingship was forming between us. The message read, "Dad wants to visit your office. He's been talking about Cloud Nest non-stop since he actually looked at your client list. I know it's weird, but I think he's genuinely proud and doesn't know how to express it. Your call entirely." I considered the request. Richard Preston, proud of his adopted daughter's tech company after years of dismissing it as a hobby. The irony wasn't lost on me. But Catherine had been true to her word over the past months, showing up consistently, asking real questions, doing the hard work of building an authentic relationship. Maybe my father deserved the same opportunity. Next Tuesday, 2 o'clock, I typed back. Professional visit, office tour, meet the team. No personal drama. Brandon's response was immediate, understood. Thank you. The door to my office opened and Derek Hamilton walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that had become familiar over recent months, part business partner, part friend, part fellow survivor of family catastrophe. His divorce from Vanessa had been finalized 3 weeks ago, quiet and quick with a settlement that had been generous on his part despite her dishonesty. He'd told me he just wanted it over, wanted to close that chapter and move forward. Morning meeting in 20 minutes, he said, handing me one of the coffees. Marcus wants to discuss the timeline for the San Francisco property. I saw his email. We're ahead of schedule, actually. The new hires are working out better than expected. Derek settled into the chair across from my desk, the same chair where we'd had dozens of conversations over the past months as our professional relationship had evolved into something more personal. He knew about my weekly calls with Catherine, about Brandon's efforts at connection, about my careful boundaries with Richard. I knew about his therapy sessions, about his process of understanding how he'd missed so many warning signs, about his determination to approach future relationships with more awareness and less assumption. Vanessa sent me a message last night, he said. First time she's reached out since the divorce papers were signed. I set down my coffee. What did she say? That she's sorry. That she's been in therapy and is starting to understand some things about herself. That she hopes someday I might forgive her. He paused. She also asked if you and I were together. Apparently, someone told her we'd been seen having coffee regularly. What did you tell her? The truth. That you're my business partner and my friend, and that whatever happens between us in the future will be built on honesty rather than assumption. He smiled slightly. She didn't respond to that. The conversation was interrupted by Patricia poking her head in. Natalie, your 2 o'clock for Tuesday just called to confirm. Your father sounded nervous, which I found oddly endearing. After she left, Derek raised an eyebrow. Richard Preston is coming here? Apparently he's discovered I'm not actually running a failing hobby business and wants to see what I've built. That must feel complicated. Everything about my family feels complicated. But I'm learning that complicated doesn't mean impossible. I stood, gathering my materials for the morning meeting. 6 months ago, I would have said no immediately. Kept my walls up, protected myself from potential disappointment. Now I'm willing to let him try, even if it doesn't work out. Derek rose as well. That's growth. Or foolishness. Time will tell. The meeting with Marcus and the expansion team went smoothly, plans clicking into place with the precision that came from good people doing excellent work. Afterward, I spent the afternoon reviewing security protocols and responding to client emails, the rhythm of work both grounding and energizing. This was what I'd built. This tangible evidence of vision and effort and strategic thinking made manifest. Tuesday arrived with unexpected sunshine, rare for Seattle in March. My father appeared precisely at 2, dressed in a suit that suggested he'd considered this a formal occasion. Brandon accompanied him, probably for moral support, and I was grateful for his presence as a buffer against potential awkwardness. Richard Preston stood in Cloud Nest's reception area, looking around at the sleek modern space with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride, maybe. Or regret. Possibly both. Natalie, he said, his voice formal. Thank you for allowing this visit. I gave them the full tour, introducing team members, explaining our security architecture, detailing the projects that had established Cloud Nest's reputation. My father asked surprisingly informed questions, revealing that he'd done research, had actually read the articles about the company, had made an effort to understand what I'd built. Brandon hung back, letting us navigate this strange new dynamic without interference. In my office afterward, Richard sat heavily in the visitor's chair. I've made many mistakes in my life, but dismissing your potential ranks among my greatest. I spent 20 years telling myself I was being realistic when I was actually being blind. Why are you telling me this? Because your mother said I needed to take accountability rather than waiting for you to absolve me of guilt I haven't earned forgiveness for. He met my eyes. I failed you as a father. I prioritized my own comfort and preconceptions over seeing who you actually were. And I'm sorry, Natalie. Genuinely, deeply sorry. The apology wasn't enough to erase 20 years of dismissal. But it was a beginning, a foundation we might build something authentic on if we both chose to try. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. And for making the effort to actually see Cloud Nest instead of just hearing about it secondhand. We talked for another hour, careful and honest, neither of us pretending this conversation fixed everything but both acknowledging it mattered. When he left, Brandon lingered. That wasn't easy for him, my brother said. Admitting he was wrong, coming here, facing evidence of how badly he misjudged you. I know. It wasn't easy for me either, letting him in. But you did it anyway. I did it anyway. That evening, I met Derek for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. We'd fallen into this pattern over recent months, these dinners that weren't quite dates but weren't purely professional either. We were figuring out what we might become to each other, taking it slowly, building on the foundation of mutual respect that had existed long before either of us knew we'd eventually meet. How did it go with your father? He asked over wine and pasta. Better than expected. Still complicated, but maybe heading towards something real. That's all any of us can hope for. Complicated but real instead of simple but false. We talked about work and family and the strange path that had led from a wedding disaster to this moment, two people who'd worked together for 3 years finally learning each other's stories. When he reached across the table and took my hand, it felt like both a beginning and a continuation of something that had been building since that first phone call years ago when he'd been just a voice asking for help with security architecture. I don't know where this goes, he said quietly. But I know I want to find out. Honestly this time, without assumptions or projections, just two people figuring out if complicated but real might be enough. It's enough, I said. Complicated but real is more than enough. The city lights reflected on the water as evening settled over Seattle. Somewhere, my family was continuing their own journeys toward understanding and growth. Vanessa was in therapy, working through whatever had made her need to diminish me to feel secure. My parents were learning to see their adopted daughter as she actually was rather than who they'd assumed she'd be. Brandon was becoming the brother he should have been years ago. And I was here, in the life I'd built when family hadn't been enough, discovering that sometimes the greatest gift isn't finding where you belong but creating belonging wherever you stand. Cloud Nest, Derek, the slowly reconstructing relationships with my family, none of it was simple. But all of it was real, honest, and mine. That was worth more than any inheritance, any recognition, any validation I'd once desperately sought. Because in the end, the best response to people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so undeniably real that their opinions become irrelevant, then choosing grace when they finally open their eyes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.